The spirit of virtual warfare versus the system of roleplay fighting. The idea that science seems to be the basis for the system of roleplay fighting on many sites, an example, stated actual and realistic measurements, gives the evidence that roleplay on such a level portrays the virtues of intellect and knowledge as keys to achieve a more vivid and accurate picture of what is actual and true. Also, in accordance with fighting, having precise and accurate measurements of the matter and mass that attempts to be stated leaves no room for assumptions or interruptions, which is the ability to fill in the blank of what the opponent did not state. An example, player 1 forms a water ball and throws it at you. Player 2, since you did not state the speed of the water ball, I say it moves slow and falls short of its target. By filling in the blanks yourself, the opponent cannot dictate the outcome of your action because the measurement of the outcome has already been stated in sound, leaving no room for assumptions or interruptions. However, there is a problem with this way of fighting, having to accurately state measurements to avoid interruptions. An example, stating how fast your punch is moving. When stating actual speeds, one may also be negligent on the other measurements that follow suit, which may also be responsible for the speed that the punch is being carried out in. An example, the exertion of the punch, the weight and force in which the punch is generated, the circumference of the fist, and the volume of the muscle within the hand. When most, if not all of these measurements are neglected, they can be used as an opportunity to interrupt the attack. An example, seeing that no level of exertion was stated, the punch had took forever to generate, seeing it come from a mile away. Or 2, seeing that no force for the punch was stated, even though the punch was fast, it did little to no damage. And 3, seeing that the circumference of the fist and the volume of the muscle within the fist was not stated, it became a tiny baby fist, doing him no harm. With such measurements undocumented, you can interrupt the attack anytime and make it virtually useless, ineffective, or even non-existent. By this understanding, the attempt to stress the issue of real and accurate documentation on certain things will only display a level of hypocrisy and selective and biased nature and understanding. This causes the system to be flawed and esoteric and only suitable to those who subside under compulsion. With all due respect, many roleplay fighting systems are a chaotic mashup of various guidelines agreed upon and split up into different regions and tiers to avoid contradiction, but is absent on the actual and accurate measurements of space-time. This is why certain measurements must be precise and accurate as an attempt to replicate the measurement of time and space, documenting speed and molecular composition in order to emulate the physics of the real world and simulate a virtual one. And so, since all measurements wouldn't be stated for actual and accurate replica, the concept of space-time will be unfairly documented, untrue, hypocritical, contradictory, in all things unlawful. For if I cannot interrupt by exertion or force or volume or circumference, how can I call the system fair or just? It will always be distorted, controlled, and authorized by a heart of pride and confusion. For if all these things are true, how can one sincerely stand up for a system designed and emulated for controlling power, encouraged to be upheld in its current form? One must realize this, that the concept of time and space can and may never be perfectly emulated virtually by human efforts, but only acknowledged and understood in a way where interruptions wouldn't be done off the measurements that simulate time and space, but off the actions and reactions that time and space allows to exist, which emulates the measurements of speed, force, and all things on its own. Thus, interruptions will not be based on the measurements one forgot to add, but the point in space-time one forgot to state, with the measurements of speed, force, and exertion being used to create a bigger and brighter picture for fun and color, not to avoid interruptions. This allows all things that humans could achieve either by fact or theory possible in the virtual world, because stating measurements to simulate space-time to avoid being invalidated wouldn't be the case, but keeping track of the occupancy of space-time in that particular moment. An example, as you punch at this speed, I move my head at this speed to avoid your punch. Later, at this time, I punch at you with a fist traveling at this speed with this much force to produce a weight here against your face. Versus, as you punch, I swing my head left just enough for the fist to graze me. As my opponent is recovering from his punch, I begin to punch at his face. So as he will finish his recovery, my punch will begin to impact his face, attempting to knock him out. Virtually, both versions will have the same measurements, but one will be stating the actual measurements while the other will be stating the moments in space-time that the measurements are created from. This means the measurements to replicate such moment in space-time wouldn't be stressed, but instead the moment itself will be the primary focus. An example, during my weave to avoid, I also have to state the measurements of the aspiration of my weave, where my head is placed and the deceleration to the destination where it will be placed at. Not only so, but also the same for my punch. This entire world is filled with all types of measurements, and if one is missed, the entire project can prove to be false or flawed. However, focusing on the concept of space-time, which is already elusive, moment by moment, step by step, motion to motion, allows the measurements to fill in the blank themselves, maintaining a system without the rules and the control of man, but by the grace and understanding of spirit and truth, cultivating a perfect and flawless system embodied in a perfect vessels, bestowing hope and peace to all who participate in it. By focusing on documenting precise measurements, one repelled the actual activity of technique, skill, and creativity, which is what roleplay is all about. So as one would spend hours preparing or documenting precise measurements, the experience of diving into the heart of battle, which will only involve technique, skill, and creativity, not precise data for every moment in space-time, would not be experienced often. One would never know what to do when someone punches or attempts to a counter, or more advanced, move faster than the speed of sound, or attempt to read the minds and see the future. By focusing on procedures and not limits, processes and not boundaries, one will be able to fully experience the world of roleplay fighting without dictation, rulers, or principles, creating a new world every day, always growing and learning, staying teachable and open-minded to all things, emulating virtual gods and simulating a virtual heaven. The spirit of virtual warfare versus the system of roleplay fighting. The idea that science seems to be the basis for the system of roleplay fighting on many sites, an example, stating actual and realistic measurements, gives the evidence that roleplay on such a level portrays the virtues of intellect and knowledge as keys to achieve a more vivid and accurate picture of what is actual and true. Also, in accordance with fighting, having precise and accurate measurements of the matter and mass that attempts to be stated leaves no room for assumptions or interruptions, which is the ability to fill in the blank of what the opponent did not state.